Tainiste, 5 weeks ago you referred to very serious protected disclosures from two senior Gardaí to retired Judge Ursula O'Neill for urgent inquiry. Now, the disclosures which alleged that the Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan was directly involved in a systematic and organised campaign to discredit the whistleblower Maurice McKay with colleagues, politicians, journalists were due to be investigated by the former judge, who is due to conclude and report back next week. Now, he was given no powers of compellability, no terms of reference. Attempts made by other whistleblowers to have their cases also heard, as they too are the victims of bullying and harassment since making protected disclosure, were ignored, despite the fact that their testimony and their experiences are current. They get to the very heart of the systemic problems inside An Garda Síochana, that what's said in public and done privately are two entirely different things. Now, it was hardly an auspicious start to the inquiry, given that was its foundation, and you'd be forgiven for thinking, actually, that it was put together as a fig leaf, maybe for you to take cover behind for your lack of action in this regard. Now, that view has been strengthened when we now find out that with a week to go to the issuing of his report, the former judge has not requested any material from either of the two whistleblowers. He hasn't met either man. He hasn't even spoken to either man. In fact, the only interaction about 2 weeks ago was a request to their legal teams to pass on the protected disclosure to the Garda Commissioner. You couldn't make this up. What sort of an inquiry do you honestly expect us to believe that this is? Because while this has been going on, we've had the Garda Commissioner appear at the Justice Committee with senior officers who are at the heart of many of the protected disclosure complaints. At the same meeting, the Garda Commissioner misled the committee by stating that she wasn't privy to information about a campaign of harassment against any member of the force, when she was actually in direct receipt of 14 occurrences and letters outlining precisely that situation. She's been the subject of a detailed Section 41 complaint, which you've been briefed on. We're awaiting the GSOC finding, and she's lost the support of the ranks of that force by intervening in a partisan way in their legitimate plague claim with her threats of martial law. So my question to you, Tainiste, is why have you allowed this situation to continue to the crisis point that it's at? On what basis do you believe that you have the right to delegate to the retired judges, to GSOC and to the courts functions that are your responsibility in law, namely to hold the Commissioner to account?
Tainiste.
Well, I would have thought, Deputy, that the Court of Appeal ruling today would have been a very intense reminder to members of this House that we should take stock and reflect before making allegations here. The good name and reputation, I would say, of all individuals deserves respect and fair procedures. You're putting on the record various points about a report a judge is currently conducting and is due to report on next week. You're saying that you have access to details about that. I don't. This is an independent report by a judge. And as the House is aware, I appointed Judge Ursula O'Neill to review allegations of wrongdoing set out in some protected disclosures made to me. In addition to reviewing the allegations, Justice O'Neill has been asked to report on his conclusions, it's a preliminary report, and to make any recommendations that he considers necessary in relation to any further action deemed appropriate or warranted. The report and the review has been commenced, and he has been asked to report within 6 weeks, which would be next week. And I have no reason to believe that that deadline will not be met. So that's the situation we're in. As soon as I receive that report, I will consider it very carefully, examine the recommendations that have been made, and the Government will decide on future action in relation to the points that you've made. I asked Judge O'Neill to do this review because I was very concerned, as I've stated in this House previously, at the content in the material that I had received. And that's why I decided that this should be done. The Garda Commissioner, for her part, has indicated publicly that An Garda Síochana will cooperate fully with any examination of these matters. And you know how the judge conducts his business during this 6 weeks is a matter for him. I will get the report, I will examine the report and will decide on action, I can assure you, in relation to the issues that he has examined. But I'd like to see his recommendations first. This was a first, if you like, a first assessment that it would be extremely useful to ask a judge to examine in the first instance the material that had been given to me. Now, if for any reason he has concerns about the level of cooperation during these 6 weeks, I have no doubt that he will make that very clear, and I will certainly be reading his report with great interest when I receive it next week.
Before I bring you back, Deputy Daly, can I say that, generally speaking, it would be my desire to ensure that every leader here had an opportunity during leaders' questions to raise matters of important public concern, and you're doing that. We have absolute privilege here, but we should be very, very careful how we use that absolute privilege. And it has been a long-standing precedent that we would not make allegations against people outside the House. You've referred to the protected disclosures. That certainly is a matter that is in the public media. But you have made specific allegations about a committee being misled by the Garda Commissioner. I think that's inappropriate. I don't think it's something you should do, and it certainly is not something you should now repeat.
I take my responsibility very seriously in that regard, Count Corla. I can state again very firmly that anything I said was not an allegation at all. It was not a use of privilege. It was details of facts which can be supported by evidence, and I have no problem in standing over any of those points. The Tainiste makes the point that it's up to the judge to carry out the inquiry as he sees fit. He can only do that within the confines of the powers that he has. Can the Tainiste confirm to the House that the judge has been given the authority to request the electronic information that supports the allegations in the heart of these matters? Because people's good names are very important. And at the heart of this matter is the muddying and the tarnishing of the good name of Sergeant Maurice McCabe and of the horrendous nightmare that is being experienced by members of An Garda Síochana currently who have made protected disclosures, and not just the ones whose names are in the public domain. But subsequent to a lot of this happening, myself and Deputy Wallace have met with a further 6 serving members of An Garda Síochana who have all either made protected disclosures or are on the verge of doing so. So what I'm trying to get my head around is, what part of this do you think is normal and is okay? We have an enormous crisis of confidence inside An Garda Síochana, primarily and largely centred in the role of the Garda Commissioner. The civilian head of An Garda Síochana, GSOC and the courts are investigating these matters. You seem to be okay with delegating your legal responsibility for doing precisely that to others, and you won't get away with it.
What I have done is made sure that if allegations arrive on my desk, that they are appropriately handled. I want to ensure that whistleblowers feel a confidence in coming forward. Every action I have taken has been targeted at ensuring that whistleblowers who come forward, for example in An Garda Síochana, are dealt with appropriately and properly. The actions of the Garda Commissioner in relation to working with Transparency Ireland, in relation to the new policy and the implementation of that policy, has to be to ensure that whistleblowers feel supported if they come forward. There are many challenges facing An Garda Síochana, and what this government and the last government has done is taken steps to ensure that there are bodies there who have independent responsibility to monitor, to assess, to discuss with An Garda Síochana the various issues which arise. That's why we set up an independent Garda authority. First time we've ever had an independent Garda authority responsible for oversight of the work of An Garda Síochana. Members of this House have consistently called for independent bodies to monitor the work, to take account of the various initiatives the Gardaí are involved in, to look at the policies, to look at the implementation. We've constantly called for such bodies. We now have the Police Authority. We now have GSOC, who are responsible for investigating complaints. I will not take any actions that will cut across the work of the independent bodies that members of this House sought to ensure were in place.
Thank you, Tainiste.